Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More historical fiction webinar. We're so excited today. We have 6 authors presenting, a debut author, an author that has won a Mary Higgins Clark Cloak and Dagger Award, authors that have a New York Times and USA bestselling books. And Etta will be moderating. We're so happy to have Etta with us. She is a librarian and the co-founder of First Clue. Etta, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the authors for joining us today, as well as the audience out there. Good to see you all. So as Elenita said, I am a librarian, and I also wanted to tell you a little about a newish venture I have going on before we meet all the authors. Before my current life, in a past life, I used to be an editor at School Library Journal and Library Journal. And now I've started with a librarian friend from that life, a publication called First Clue. First Clue is a newsletter a free newsletter that comes out every Thursday, and we review forthcoming crime fiction that we love. So that means if we don't like a book, we don't pretend we like it, we just don't review it. We aim to be the first to cover a book so that librarians can get a very early look at what's coming down the road and get your order and any related programs in place. We also have a website, firstcluereviews.com, where you can find the 450 plus reviews we've already done. And there'll be, I think, 6 more tomorrow. My co-founder and editor at First Clue is Brian Kenny, who's also a librarian and was editor-in-chief at Library Journal. And as contributing reviewers, we have Wilda Williams, another former editor at Library Journal, and Jeff Ayers, who writes thriller reviews for that magazine and is co-executive director of Thriller Fest. So we're very lucky to have those 2 on board. You can sign up for the free newsletter at firstcluereviews.com, and we sure hope to see you there. Thank you. And now let's move on to our first author.
Do you want to introduce her?
Oh, I'm sorry. Our first author, who is, I think, as Elenita will describe, she's not able to be here today. It's the author of The Paris Daughter, who is Kristen Harmel. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Harmel, and I'm the New York Times bestselling author of more than a dozen novels, including 2020's The Book of Lost Names and this year's The Paris Daughter, which takes place in Paris during and after World War II, and also in New York 15 years after the end of the war. I'm unfortunately on a flight right now, so I cannot be with you, and I am very sad to miss what I know will be an incredible panel with 5 other standout historical fiction authors. From Nancy Horan's The House of Lincoln, set in mid-19th century Illinois, to Gail Lukaszyk's The Darkness Surrounds Us, and Avery Cunningham's The Mayor of Maxwell Street, both set in the Midwest during the tumultuous years following World War I. And from my friend Madeline Martin's The Keeper of Hidden Books, set in World War II Warsaw, to Naomi Hirahara's Evergreen, set just after World War II in California. These novels span more than 100 years of world history, and through the setting of past world events, tackle issues that are still tremendously relevant today. That's what I love about historical fiction. The past teaches us the present. Through looking backward, we find ourselves looking forward, learning lessons about ourselves, the world, and our own humanity that help us to face tomorrow. I love it when I hear from readers who tell me that one of my books has taught them something they didn't know about the past. And I love it even more when they say they learned something about themselves that will help them to live a better future. And I think that's the magic of fiction. And these 5 women that you'll hear from today are all doing a tremendous job of bringing the past alive. Now, Elenita from Brodart asked me to share some thoughts about The Paris Daughter with you. So without taking too much of your time, and especially without taking time away from the wonderful conversation I know you'll have with Madeline, Avery, Naomi, Nancy, and Gail, here goes. So I had the initial idea for The Paris Daughter while researching The Book of Lost Names. That book dealt in part with hidden children during the war, and in interviewing adults who had been hidden 80 years ago, and also in reading survivor testimony from hidden children, one theme kept rising to the surface. So many of them had such clear memories, even years and years later, of living under the threat of being bombed. That idea grabbed me and took hold. In thinking about civilians being bombed during World War II, I generally thought about those in England being bombed by the bad guys. But what about on the continent in occupied countries where it was actually the Allies trying to help? But because not all of the bombs hit their intended targets, innocent people died. For me, it was an interesting topic to dig into, and that led me down the path of thinking about what I, as a mother, might have done if my children were in danger during a war and my options were few. So that was the seed of the idea for the book, which is about two mothers, two daughters, an Allied bomb that falls where it shouldn't in the suburbs of Paris, two families torn apart forever, and a storyline that picks up 15 years after the end of the war, where a chance encounter sets the two mothers on a collision course toward each other once again, forcing old mysteries to the surface and leading to answers that will change everything forever. Now, one of the characters, Juliet, is a bookstore owner. There comes a time in the book where she clings to that bookstore like a life raft. But before the war and during the war's early years, that bookstore was a sanctuary, a place of peace and solace, as bookstores the world over are for so many of us who love books. The other main character, Elise, is an artist, and it was a challenge for me to make her a woodcarver, an art medium I knew little about. But I liked the idea and the symbolism of bringing to life a piece of wood which was once alive itself. Kind of like giving the wood a second chance to discover a second life, a second act, which Elise and Juliet must find in the book too, after they face loss. So Alanita also asked about the writing process, and I hope that today the other 5 authors will talk about that too, because I think that there are as many different ways to write a book as there are authors writing. I co-host a weekly web show and podcast called Friends in Fiction with fellow New York Times bestselling authors Mary Kay Andrews, Patty Callahan Henry, and Christy Woodson Harvey. And each week we host different authors on the show, all of whom seem to have a slightly different way of writing. Some write in longhand and then type their stories out. Others, like me, can't read their own handwriting. Some who we call pantsers fly by the seat of their pants, making their stories up as they go. And some are plotters, writing out outlines that see them through the book from beginning to end. I'm a plotter, and I always have been. I start with research, then I write an outline, then I do some more research, then I write the first draft, and then I do still more research to fill in the blanks before setting it aside for a few weeks and coming back to printed out pages for a full edit. The whole process takes me about a year. Now, Henrietta sent a couple of great questions too, so I'll try to answer those. She asked first about writing a wartime story that centers on women. Great question, Henrietta. I've been doing that for more than a decade now, starting with The Sweetness of Forgetting in 2012. Here it is. And I think that the majority, here's The Sweetness of Forgetting. I think most people writing about World War II today are doing that. For so long, when a World War II story appeared in book or film form, it was typically about men doing something on the battlefield. And that story is still very appealing. But the fact is, the war was won in part by civilians whose stories were not often told until the last decade. And many of those civilians, particularly in organizations like the French Underground, were women. I think that those of us writing about women in wartime now are shining a light on heroes that history had overlooked for too long. And in writing about women who stepped forward to do extraordinary things, often with no training or qualifications, it's a constant reminder that all of us have the ability to be extraordinary in times of difficulty or darkness. Henrietta also asked about walking the line between staying realistic and portraying hardships and keeping the overall story of the Paris daughter uplifting. It's a great question, and my answer is pretty simple. I think that in life itself, hope and despair are two sides of the same coin. We will all walk through valleys of darkness, but it's the way we find our way back to the light that defines us. Sometimes that's a very difficult thing to do, but we all have the ability within ourselves to find hope, even in the most impossible situations. And I think that sometimes it's only when we find ourselves in the deepest darkness that we discover that well of light that has been there within us all along. I hope that's a message you find not only in The Paris Daughter, but in all of my novels. So thank you to Henrietta and Alanita for the great questions. Gail, Nancy, Naomi, Avery, and Madeline, I am so sorry I will miss speaking with all of you. And to all of you out there who are involved with libraries, thank you. Books are essential doorways to other lives, other worlds, other experiences. And you are the protectors of those magical gateways, which help us all to be better and happier people. We need you now more than ever. Thank you for helping the 6 of us authors and authors all around the world reach readers. And thank you for helping readers to find the books they need to make their own lives bigger, brighter, and better. I hope you had a great chat today.
very much, Kristen, up there on the plane. And now we're going to, oh, are we ready? We're going to introduce our next author, who is Avery Cunningham, and she's going to talk about her book, The Mayor of Maxwell Street, which is a debut. Welcome, Avery.
Hi, everyone. First, let me take this time to thank Brodart for hosting this wonderful event.
Oh,
and
Avery, I can't hear you very well. Could you move closer to the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Can you hear me better now?
A little, but can you kind of yell?
Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. How's that?
That's great, thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. First, let me take this time to thank Brodart for hosting this wonderful event and inviting us all to participate. Thank you to the authors who joined the panel to share their wisdom and talent with us. I'm honored to be featured with all of you. Thank you to Etta for crafting such poignant and insightful questions about our work. And finally, thank you to the librarians attending for not only taking the time to view this panel, but also all you do to bring new and engaging narratives to your communities and defend the inherent right we all have to experience diverse stories. As Etta said, The Mayor of Maxwell Street is my debut novel, and this, in fact, here is my debut author event, my first panel, my first webinar, so I'm doubly excited to be here. I'm very nervous, so I hope I don't pale in comparison to all of the very, very experienced and lauded authors who are also joining us. The Mayor of Maxwell Street is set in early 1920s Chicago and revolves around two central characters, Nellie Sawyer and Jay Shorey. Nellie is the daughter of a very wealthy Kentucky horse breeder who is often called the wealthiest Black man in America. Considering this, Nellie has grown up in relative privilege and isolation. Not much has been expected of her, those expectations typically falling to her older brother, the family's presumed heir and inheritor of the Sawyer legacy. This leaves plenty of time for her to pursue her dream of one day writing as an investigative journalist for the Chicago Defender, a historically Black news publication based out of Chicago. However, all of this changes when her brother dies tragically in a car accident. Her family is summoned to Chicago not only to lay him to rest, but also participate in what's being called the Grand Season, a time when the many insular Black communities of wealth and prestige have gathered together in an attempt to form a unified center of the most celebrated and lauded Black Americans so they might wield more national influence. Nellie is very dismissive of these proceedings and is a bit of an outsider. Her family is nouveau, rising up from rough origins, so she does not easily assimilate into the society events and gatherings. She fears that with the family's future now resting on her shoulders, her dreams of independence and career will be over before they begin. But the editor of the Chicago Defender offers her one chance at a way out. He gives her the impossible task of identifying, finding, and interviewing the murky head of an underground criminal organization, known only as the Mayor of Maxwell Street. To help her find this person, she seeks the aid of our other central character, Jay Shorey. Jay is the biracial son of a Black man and a white woman come up to Chicago to build a new life for himself. He's a low-level speakeasy manager and has aspirations of breaking into the world of the original Black elite, but like Nellie, finds himself often ostracized. He reluctantly agrees to help her on her quest to find the Mayor of Maxwell Street, and together they descend into the intriguing and dangerous world of the Chicago Underground at the time. Along the way, feelings develop, as they often do, and they must face their own ambitions and decide if love is enough to risk it all. The Mayor of Maxwell Street is loosely inspired by The Great Gatsby. I wanted to explore those timeless themes of class, identity, wealth, love, and societal changes in the 1920s, but through the lens of Black Americans and the Black elite. Black Americans at this time were in the midst of a migration that would transform the face of the country, and Chicago was the clearest representation of that change. The themes Fitzgerald explored become more profound, revealing, and harshly relevant when placed in a community that was in a fight for its existence at this time and even to this day. I also want to talk a little bit about the title. If you're unfamiliar with Chicago, then Maxwell Street might not mean much to you, but if you are, then you'll recognize it as the site of the Maxwell Street Market. The Maxwell Street Market has existed in Chicago for well over 100 years, and throughout its existence has been a place that captures the staggering cultural and ethnic diversity of Chicago. It's also historically not as constrained by segregation as other parts of the city and the country. To paraphrase a quote from the book, the game on Maxwell Street was commerce and anyone who could pay could play. In the novel, the market represents the freedom of the 1920s and the potential to change yourself into anything and everything to achieve greatness. As these characters discover, yes, you can have it all with enough determination, grit, savvy, and risk, but there is a price for that freedom. And in America, everyone pays, one way or another. What you can expect from The Mayor of Maxwell Street is a suspenseful, engaging, sprawling, and romantic tale with all that we love about Roaring Twenties narratives. Fast cars, flashy clothes, parties, booze, and gangsters. Yet you can also expect a delving into the sacrifices that we all must make to hold on to our own little slice of peace in this world, and the drastic and even fatal decisions that precede those sacrifices. So that's all I prepared initially to talk about the book. I'd love to start engaging with the questions. I know Etta has some, and hopefully we'll have some from the participants as well.
Thanks, Avery. Yes, please do send in any questions that you have. We would love to hear from you. Okay, Avery, so my first question for you is related to when Nellie dances at the cotillion. She feels as though she and Jay are, quote, trapped in some crawl space between worlds. This lovely description seems to also describe Nellie's existence as the daughter of the richest Black man in the United States during Prohibition, as you described. Can you talk about your development of this character, Nellie, who's racially, economically, and as a woman trying to make it in journalism, straddling two worlds, neither of which knows what to do with her?
Sure, of course, and thank you so much for the question. Writers just starting out are often encouraged to write what we know. And with Nellie, I did pull from some of my own personal experiences growing up as a member of a very small, very insular, upper middle class Black community in West Tennessee. Throughout my childhood, I often felt that I was straddling multiple worlds and either wasn't allowed or did not feel comfortable fully immersing myself in any of them, whether they be from the perspective of school or church or my family or the community in which I was living. Like Nellie and even like Jay, I felt I was always searching for some balance between the loyalties we harbor to race, class, family, duty, and the passions of our heart, which can be often dichotomous with those loyalties. This characterization of Nellie also ties back to some thematic elements of Gatsby. To quote, I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. As I grew and connected with others throughout my adulthood and my young adulthood, I realized that many young Black Americans raised in similar environments dealt with similar feelings of being trapped or excluded in a deeply personal way. The chance to explore those experiences and the impact they can have on us emotionally was really one of the most enriching aspects of this novel.
Thank you. And I have to say, I didn't, when I read the book, it somehow didn't twig with me that it was, sort of in parallel to The Great Gatsby, but now it seems very obvious. And
no, that's good. It wasn't, it's not obvious. So I'm glad it is more thematic than that.
Well, it's interesting. Now I'll be thinking back about the parallels and the differences and similarities. So I have another question. Can you tell us about your research for this book about rich Black people's lives during Jim Crow? Was it hard to find narratives about that experience?
Not truly, and then I'll talk a little bit about not just the perspective of rich African Americans, but just all African Americans in general. It was soberingly easy to find narratives that brought forth that experience. The documentation on how Jim Crow brutally and systematically abused Black communities throughout the South and throughout America truly is fast. Once you discover one source, 1,000 more open up. And I oftentimes had to take a step back because I was overwhelmed by the knowledge and of course deeply affected by it. For Black American elite and prestigious communities, those have so often been very insular, very private, very much of our community. So finding resources that had more exploration of what that looked like from a more general perspective was difficult, but once I did find those sources, they were hugely beneficial. And honestly, it's strange. You may grow up in a community, in a place, in a time, but you don't know the full scope of it. You don't know its full history. So it was an education for me, as well as a great chance for research that really filled out the setting and the narrative of the story. To shout out a specific source, The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson was a great primary source for me. Her narrative and scholarly exploration of the Great Migration gave me a really solid foundational knowledge of what Jim Crow looked like, felt like, acted like, from the most micro to the most macro of aggressions, how Black lives were constrained by Jim Crow, and also how they broke free of it. If anyone hasn't already, I of course enthusiastically recommend taking the time to read More of Other Sons. It's impeccably researched and beautifully written. I really could not have had The Mayor of Maxwell Street without it. The original Black Elite is a work of nonfiction that was also deeply influential for me. And then the author has recently passed away, but another work of nonfiction called Our Kind of People, which is an exploration of what the Black elite has looked like throughout America, throughout history, up until I think it was published in the late 90s, was also a hugely beneficial source for me. Again, like I said, it's strange you may grow up as part of a community but not really know it until you're exposed to great sources like that. And if anyone has any other questions about research or sources that I might recommend, I'd be happy to take those questions.
Thank you. Oh, actually, I just was looking in the Q&A to see if there's a question, and Molly Nota asks what primary and secondary sources helped aid you in your research. So I guess we heard some books there, but were there also primary sources, like maybe newspaper accounts or anything like that that you used?
No, of course. The Chicago Defender itself has wonderful archives, and once you're able to have access to those were hugely beneficial in terms of getting a voice for the time, a sense of the place, especially the Chicago, but also the Chicago Defender published nationally and sometimes internationally. It really was about telling stories of Black Americans throughout the country, not just Chicago, even though their base was in Chicago. So those archives were a great resource for me and really gave me some wonderful perspective and voice that I might have not been able to really capture on my own successfully. And newspaper archives in general, and of course I've heard so many authors, especially historical fiction, talk about this, but newspaper archives were deeply influential and helpful for me to really understand what the issues were of the time, what the voice was at the time, what people living and breathing and loving and working in that space really cared about, what they put their energy into. So Chicago Defender is one of my main sources, but in general, any newspaper archive I could find was great for me and was a huge help to me. Let's see, I don't want to misquote anything. Black Past is another source that was really helpful. It's a website that details so many Black Americans historically and their influence and their bios and their legacies. That was a great kind of first stop for me when I was trying to really fill out the cast of this novel. There are a lot of cameos from individuals who are actual members of these historical societies and had some historical influence. So that was a great stop when I was trying to be sure I was representing people, whether the actual historical figures or interpretations of those figures, to the best of my ability in the loyalist way possible. But those are a few to think about. I don't again want to misquote. I may think of a few more and post them in the chat while we're talking.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting all kinds of ideas for the librarians out there now who could do maybe a book club on these things, like this. The Mayor of Maxwell Street would match up great with Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Sons, like you were mentioning, but also her more recent cast. Definitely plays a role here, where I'm about to say Avery, sorry, Nellie is definitely in a separate cast from many of the other African-American characters in the book. So I think the ideas there would play well too. And if anybody has that book club, please invite me. All right, but thank you very much, Avery, for those comments and introducing your book. And next we are moving on to Naomi Hirahara, who is the author of Evergreen. Naomi.
You're muted.
Hello, everyone. It was so wonderful to hear of Avery's book, and I think there's a lot of parallels of what I'm trying to do with these two books, Clark and Division, and the follow-up Evergreen. Clark and Division, just like Maxwell Street, refers to a place in Chicago, and that book had introduced a Japanese American family, the Itos, and they went from Los Angeles during World War II to they were forcibly removed to the Manzanar Detention Center. And then from there, the shining older sister, Rose, goes to Chicago. And then the younger sister, Aki, and these two series of books are told from Aki's point of view. Aki and her immigrant parents then follow. The Clarkin Division takes place in 1944. And at that time, Aki discovers that something terrible has befallen her sister, and it's up to her to find out the truth, as well as carry her immigrant parents through this very tumultuous part of Japanese American history. So now with Evergreen, we're still with the Itos, we're still with Aki, but they have now returned to Los Angeles, their home, their former home in 1946. Aki comes back as a married woman. Her husband is in Europe. He has fought he's part of the 142nd Regimental Combat Team, which many of you are probably familiar with. It was all Japanese American segregated unit, one of the most decorated military units during World War II for a unit of its size. And Aki and her parents are finding that while it's home, it's not the same home that they had left in 1942. Aki now is a nurse's aide, and she and her parents, they live in this part of this neighborhood, Los Angeles neighborhood called Boyle Heights. And Boyle Heights historically and today has kind of been the way station for disenfranchised people, newcomers, immigrants. So instead of this wealthier neighborhood that they had lived in, now they live in Boyle Heights. And Evergreen is a major thoroughfare in that area of Los Angeles. There's the multi-ethnic Evergreen Cemetery. The Japanese hospital where Aki works is right there. There's a hostel, there's a Japanese American church, and they also live close to that particular street as well. So I write mysteries, I write crime. So something happens to one of Aki's patients. And again, she has to step forward, even though she's not a paid detective, to find out the truth. And it turns out this patient has a very close relationship with her husband, who then returns back to America and lives with them in Boyle Heights. Now, the seed of this story came from actually my own late father-in-law, who was part of the 100th 442. And what I would do when he was living was they called them the Go for Broke unit, because the ferocity and the sacrificial military fighting that they exhibited. So I would give my father-in-law these books, these nonfiction books, and he told me one day, "Don't do that. It's not nice." And I was just mortified, like, what had I done? And it dawned on me that while we do celebrate what this particular unit did, that there was a huge price that these Japanese American soldiers had paid. Many of them had gone to war to assert their patriotism, and there were a high number of fatalities and casualties. My own father-in-law had been wounded and wore a knee brace his whole life. So with Evergreen, I'm examining what they called shell shock of these soldiers, and it's kind of a tale that's not often. The heroics are told, but not the sacrifice and emotional toll that these men had experienced. Another thing I'm looking at is diaspora and people moving, from one place to another. So things that Avery was just talking about. During World War II, Little Tokyo area, which is right next to City Hall, it was empty, right? Because Japanese Americans were taken from that area. And now during, there was a new influx of defense workers from the Deep South, Black Americans, and they needed a place to live. But, because of racial covenants, most areas in Southern California were not welcoming of these newcomers. But then the authorities kind of pointed to this empty part of Los Angeles and said, hey, why don't you all live there? And so Little Tokyo during that period of time became what they called Bronzeville, again, a term that we associated with Chicago. And there were, it was pretty crowded, and people had shifts all 24/7. And they had these jazz clubs, these breakfast clubs, and they would, be playing, serving pancakes, and there'll be music. And there were so many, Charlie Parker and Lucky Thompson, and even Miles Davis were some of the people who performed. So Evergreen kind of looks at these intersections. It wasn't always smooth going, but everybody has the same intention. They want a better future for their children. And it's kind of looking at all these various communities, including the Jewish American community in Boyle Heights. At one time, they were that was the largest concentration of Jewish Americans on the West Coast. And then during World War II, they were deemed like white. They were non-whites before. So they left Boyle Heights to other parts of Los Angeles. So it's really kind of a fascinating history. Clark and Division was more difficult for me to write because I'm not a native Chicagoan. I don't have a sister. But Evergreen really, I kind of poured out my experience of working at, again, Avery mentioned the ethnic newspapers. My career was at the Rafu Shimpo newspaper in Los Angeles. That's the biggest Japanese American newspaper in Los Angeles. So just all of these things are kind of melded and part of this book, Evergreen. So thank you. And I'm ready for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Naomi. I do have a couple of questions. So we reviewed Evergreen and First Clue back in January, I think. And our review noted that you portray a generational difference as part of the estrangement that's the central theme of the novel. Aki and the other young characters in Evergreen are different from their parents, very different, because growing up in the World War II camps had left an indelible mark. Can you tell us about writing that drifting, lost quality into the characters?
Yes, of course. I think the camp experience, the detention camp experience affected Japanese Americans in different ways. One way was people felt like they had to throw away or any part of themselves that were Japanese. So that may include language or certain culture. And so as a result, the elders, we called them the Issei, the first generation. These were the ones who had worked and sacrificed, created these very lucrative farms all throughout the West Coast, but especially in California. They were the fishermen. They did so much actually to help the economy of the United States. And suddenly they're kind of stripped of all that power and influence. And now the new generation who are in their 20s, who are not, they're the ones who have to be the leaders of the community, while they're also dealing with the inner turmoil of trying to assert themselves as Americans, but also wondering like, why were they locked up in these camps without, any sort of trial or hearing? They're American citizens, yet this 2/3 of those who were in the camps were this population, the Nisei, the second generations are American born. So it's a great sadness. And I know when I worked at the newspaper, I was there during the redress and reparations movement. So many people talk with sadness about that first generation because they really felt the biggest loss, and many of them had not lived to see that the US government finally admitted that this was not the right thing or constitutional thing to do.
Thank you. It sounds very tough. I also wanted to ask you about writing a novel that concerns what comes after. This novel is not about a major historical event, the war, it's about after that. So could you talk about that writing process?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really because I actually write a lot of nonfiction. And one of the books that I did for Heyday with my friend Heather Lindquist was a book called Life After Manzanar. So that particular book for the librarians might be something you might want to acquire. I don't get any royalties from it. So it's just to let people know that might be a good resource for people. But I've also done things about camp itself. I've done exhibitions. So when it came to writing fiction, I felt like this after time was lent itself, and it's for different reasons. One is there's not as much documentation of people trying to rebuild their lives, whereas just there's a lot more government reports of what happened during the incarceration period. So that's one reason. And there were, people are people. And I think a lot of Japanese Americans, we kind of deal with the model minority myth and like, oh, these are outstanding citizens. Look how easily that they were able to transition from being, behind barbed wire and, really going to college and other things. But this community really struggled. And it's, I think, something that they did not want the public to know, or maybe even within their own families. Like, I think a big theme that comes out in our particular families is silence, that people don't want to talk. And there was so much fixation on, we want things better for the next generation. So we don't want to drag, in these things that we suffered. But, and that's why I think, historical fiction, especially a mystery, and crime, it's the perfect container to tell these kind of stories.
Thank you. I agree. And now we are going to move on to the next author. And it is Gail Lukasik, the author of The Darkness Surrounds Us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel with these wonderful authors. I'm really enjoying listening to everyone speak about their books. The Darkness Surrounds Us is my 5th mystery novel, but it's my first Gothic historical mystery. The book takes place during the 1918 flu epidemic. Nurse Nellie Lester leaves her work in the Chicago contagion ward and goes to an island, the Michigan island, very remote island, and to care for the wife of a logger baron, and they are living in this very decrepit mansion. And the reason she goes there is because she finds this photograph after her mother's death, a hidden photograph that she suspects holds the secrets to her late mother's life, including her father's identity. She doesn't know who her father really is. The only problem for Nellie is it seems that her dead mother seems to have followed her to the island. So nightly, she's visited by a ghostly presence that appears in the small turret bedroom she stays in. But the question is this her dead mother, or is it something more sinister? Now, Nellie begins exploring the mansion's library, which she seems to believe offers hints that her parents were once part of this mysterious community that built up and then abruptly abandoned the island 23 years earlier. Then when the body of the mansion's previous nurse turns up in the woods, Nellie decides she's going to investigate the death of the nurse. But the locals become increasingly angry about a stranger prying into their business, and they warn her to stop. As winter closes in, Nellie starts to feel increasingly trapped and paranoid, and she knows, because she's been told, that soon the lake will freeze over. And once the lake freezes over, she is literally trapped on this island with a killer who she believes is hell-bent on keeping the island's secrets. So while Nellie struggles to uncover her mother's shocking past, the killer is plotting a final act of revenge. Now, the darkness surrounds us is all about secrets, especially family secrets. And when I wrote Nellie's character, what I did is I tapped into my own experiences regarding my mother's racial secret, which she kept from me and which I wrote about in my memoir, White Like Her, my family story of race and racial passing. So what I did is I used my hurt and my frustration at not knowing the truth of my mother's, who she really was, and her keeping that from me. And I put that into Nellie's character. But the book really primarily is a mystery and a Gothic, and it's meant to haunt and tantalize you with all these wonderful Gothic elements. So I thought I'd also say a little bit about the inspiration. People have asked me, well, you probably were inspired by the COVID pandemic, right? That's why you wrote The Darkness Surrounds Us. Nope, that's not what happened. I actually started writing the book in December of 2019. And that was before COVID hit the US. And the reason I decided to write this book is that I've always been fascinated by the 1918 flu epidemic. I don't know why, maybe because my dad was born in 1918 and I thought, wow, that must have been so hard for my grandmother. She must have been so scared to be pregnant then. So that was part of it. And I had read a lot about the 1918 epidemic, how it started and all of that. But the other inspiration came from a 19th century religious community known as the Harmonites. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Harmonites, but they ended up landing in Indiana, Harmony, Indiana. And they're a fascinating group. And I've always been fascinated by these 19th century utopian communities. So that was my other inspiration for The Darkness Surrounds Us. Though, you know, as I said, the COVID pandemic didn't really inspire the book, but it certainly contributed to it. So, you know, it's the COVID pandemic is we're watching it on television, you know, in 2020, and we're watching all these healthcare workers on the front lines, what they're enduring, what they're having to put up with, how scary it was. And I took a lot of their experiences and I shaped Nellie's character with what I saw happening in front of us. So that's, you know, what I put into it. And, you know, today we would call what happened to Nellie that she has PTSD, but back then they didn't have that terminology, but she is definitely haunted, not just by this ghostly presence that's in her room, but by the patients in the contagion ward that she couldn't save. They really haunt her. And there's one in particular that really haunts her. So that's my inspiration. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Gail. I do. I had actually been thinking that there was a COVID connection there, but now I understand there isn't. So my question is that the last couple of years, we've noticed an uptick in closed circle mysteries, kind of like a locked room mystery, but just a bit wider than that, a closed circle mystery, in which all the characters and suspects are in one place or largely in it, such as the scary house portrayed in your book. And those kind of books seem to contrast the comforting and the claustrophobic. Can you talk to us about what appealed to that kind of setting for you?
Oh, yes. Well, because I was writing a Gothic mystery, I wanted to create a menacing, haunting atmosphere. And to me, what better way to do that than to set the book on this small remote island, dominated by this decrepit mansion with a limited number of suspects. In this way, I could intensify the Gothic elements of claustrophobia, darkness, fear, and desolation. In this kind of closed circle setting that you refer to, there is nowhere for them to run or hide. They're trapped. They're trapped there. So by putting the characters in one place, the mansion and the small island, I could highlight their motives and their intentions, which in my mind made everyone appear suspicious and threatening because you're with these people all the time. The other reason I did that was it was a way for me to blur the lines between what's real and what isn't real. So that would intensify the supernatural. And I'm going to give you an example of something I did in the book that I had a lot of fun with. I'm sure many of you are aware that in the 18th and 19th centuries, that children died very young, and that if you had the means, you would have a portrait painted of your child. And there were certain symbols that would go like a butterfly. As you see, there's a butterfly in my book cover that would represent the transition from one life to another. So in the mansion, there is a death portrait of a child, and Nellie sees it the first night she's there, and every day she has to walk by it. But what starts happening to Nellie as she loses a little bit of reality in her life, she thinks that she's seeing the child in the portrait decompose. So every time she walks by, she sees the skin get a little looser, maybe the outline of the body isn't quite right. Well, this is all in her mind, but this is part of the Gothic that I wanted to create in making this mansion a scary place. So that's why I chose that setting.
Thank you. It definitely was creepy, the baby picture. But I would say to the librarians here that watching that, I think this will be a great foray into horror for any patrons who are looking to get a start on horror or supernatural books, but don't want to be too terrified on their first try. So I think it's good for getting their feet wet. Thank you, Gail. And now we're going to move to our next author, which is Nancy Horan, who wrote The House of Lincoln. Nancy, it's all yours.
Hi, I'm so happy to be with you. Hello, everybody. And I'm fascinated by the books you're talking about, all of you. I, too, have written a book that centers in a place, as you described, Naomi. And also, I was interested in the town I grew up in, Springfield, Illinois, and Lincoln's place in it. Unlike a lot of books that are written about Abraham Lincoln, though, The House of Lincoln is not only about Lincoln himself and Mary Lincoln, but it's also about the community around Lincoln. It centers on 3 families that lived in Springfield. It covers 5 decades. It goes from 1851 to 1909. And it explores the world that Lincoln came from. He chose Springfield, Illinois as his hometown. He lived there 27 years, the longest he lived in any place. The last 17 years, he lived with Mary in a house at 8th and Jackson Street in Springfield, Illinois. And I grew up there. I thought I knew quite a bit about Abraham Lincoln. When we were kids, we would visit his house and learn about, various aspects of their lives in that house. We'd visit the kitchen and look at exotic kitchen implements and look at the outhouse in the back. And I think that interested me more than when I came to really understand what Lincoln had done when I was in high school. And we learned quite a bit about Abraham Lincoln, I thought. Certainly, he is revered in Springfield, Illinois. And if you go to the central area in downtown Springfield, where the state capitol was, and that is really the center of this book, that's where it starts in the beginning and ends. It is a place now that is devoted to bronze statues of Abraham Lincoln and his family. So the town reveres Lincoln. They did when I was growing up, and they still do. And rightfully. There was a piece of history, though, that was never taught to us, and that was about the 1908 race riot in Springfield, Illinois. It was a complete repudiation of everything that Abraham Lincoln stood for. And it involved a white mob attacking a Black business area and a Black residential area. It lasted 3 days. 2 important very respected Black men were lynched, and Black and white people were killed in the mayhem. And it led to the formation of the NAACP as a result of the extraordinary circumstances of the riot. There were bigger riots, but this particular one was struck home as so appalling that it would happen in Springfield, Illinois. And Springfield was widely criticized by newspapers across America for the fact that the situation had degraded to that point in that town. So I was inspired to write the book for a couple of reasons. One was the memory of that riot and the fact that it was not something that was known to us. But also, I began it in 2014. I had just finished my last book tour. I was thinking about the subject for another book. And it was a tumultuous time in 2014, as it has remained in America. But we were 1 year into Black Lives Matter at that point. There was a lot of talk about the polarization of people in the United States. There was a lot of talk about the potential of another civil war happening in this country. That talk really disturbed me a lot, still disturbs me, because I think people don't know or remember perhaps about the horror of the Civil War. So that was a case where I just wanted to learn more about the Civil War. Well, what I learned is that if you combine all the people all the soldiers who died in the wars from the beginning of the Revolutionary War all the way through World War I and II, through the Korean War, that number was roughly equivalent to how many people died in the Civil War: 620,000 people. I felt that people should know about the Civil War somehow, and I wanted to understand it better. What led up to it? How did our time compare to that time? The things that were happening in society leading up to the Civil War we had in this country. And it was about race. The Civil War was about slavery. There are people today who will still say, well, it wasn't really about slavery, it was about states' rights or whatever. That's incorrect. It was about slavery. It always was about slavery. So, and with that, race in general. And so when I start a book, often it starts with a question. And the question I had in my mind was, how is it that we've come to this point all these years later that so many people died in the Civil War over the issues of race? And why are we still experiencing profound issues of race and race inequality in this country? So in telling the story, I really wanted to do it from the points of view of three families in Springfield, starting in 1851. And they are, first of all, the Lincoln family. And I tell their story from the point of view of Mary Lincoln. A lot has been written about the Lincolns, and I think that I just wanted to look at the inside of their personal lives at first. And so Mary saw the gem that Abraham Lincoln was before a lot of other people did, and she did a lot to support him in his career. And so Mary is attuned to the political scene that's happening in that town in the 1850s in the buildup to the Civil War. Another point of view character is an immigrant girl, and her name is Anna Ferreira. She is, I write based on real people, and also I invent characters for my books. And in this case, Anna is invented, but she is based on a real phenomenon that occurred in Springfield in 1849. A group of roughly 300 refugees, religious exiles from the island of Madeira, Portuguese island of Madeira, came to Springfield seeking a new home. And they split between two towns in Illinois, central Illinois. They had been promised jobs with a hemp company in central Illinois, and a Protestant ladies group in Chicago, in New York City, helped get these refugees from Trinidad, where they had been living temporarily, and to America. And they were headed to central Illinois when the offer of jobs was withdrawn from this company. So what happened was Springfield opened their arms anyway and said, come here, we'll find a way. And they did. And actually, over time, those Portuguese people assimilated into the population very easily. I, in fact, went to high school with some people who were descendants of those early immigrants.
Nancy,
Anna,
can I
yes.
ask you a question? And then I think we'll have to move on to Madeline, because we're almost out of time. Can I just go back to your thoughts about Mary Lincoln? How much did you have to fictionalize her? And did you want to portray her in a certain way?
You know, Mary's gotten a bad rap from a number of authors. And Mary, I think Mary had some psychological, I think Mary had bouts of mental illness, but what is not primarily noticed in her history or emphasized is how much very level time Mary Lincoln had, how much she contributed to, she was a loving mother. She was a huge supporter of her husband's political aspirations. She was very much in support of him and wrote letters and did a lot to help him. So I recognized Mary's difficult personality aspects by repeating as gossip in the book some of the things people had heard about her. But I wanted to show Mary's pain also. You know, she was an orphan. I mean, she lost her mother when she was 6 years old, and she suffered the loss of 3 of her 4 children. Mary experienced profound grief in her life, and yet she picked herself up repeatedly until the end of her life, at which time, you know, she died at 63. A pretty defeated person. She was holding her husband's hand when he was assassinated. But I think Mary deserves more credit for her role in encouraging her husband to take the presidency.
Okay, thank you. She's worth another look by many of us, I'm sure. So thank you for that. And we will move on to our final author, who is Madeline Martin, the author of The Keeper of Hidden Books.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. Madeline Martin here. And I don't know about you guys, but my TBR has definitely gotten bigger listening to all of these amazing stories, are like all about the details and everything behind them. And I did read Kristen Harmel's The Paris Daughter, so incredibly good. All of the woodworking details were just amazing. So for me, as you can tell, I'm a reader. I love books. I know all of you guys are as well. And, you know, that's almost kind of like a niche that I've fallen into with my historical fiction, writing books about books. First, there was The Last Bookshop in London which was really sort of a celebration of reading set during the Blitz and the wonderful community that formed around this one single bookstore. Next was the Librarian Spy, where we had the American librarians that were sent from the Library of Congress and the New York Library into neutral countries during World War II to gather intel. And now with the Keeper of Hidden Books, which is inspired by the true events based on Warsaw's public librarians during the Nazi occupation, as they fought to not only save books and people, but also tried to keep they had hidden libraries that they opened up when the Nazis tried to close everything down, really trying so hard to preserve that Polish culture. And, I often get asked what my process is, because I'm very, very heavy on research. I confess I'm a total research nerd. I'm a history nerd. I'm proud of both. And so, I really spend about 10 months doing research. When it came to the Keeper of Hidden Books, I ended up using 100 nonfiction books, and I went to Warsaw for 2 weeks. And whenever I travel, I always have family that come with me because everyone kind of calls dibs on a certain trip. And when my mom found out I was going to Poland, she was like, "Oh, I want to go." So she came with me for those 2 weeks. And I ended up with like 15 spiral bound notebooks completely filled with handwritten notes. And I had somebody ask me the other day how much that actually makes it into the book, and I think it's probably about 30%, but the other 70% is incredibly necessary. So with the Keeper of Hidden Books, whenever I'm researching, I don't just start in that one time period in World War II. I really look at the entire history of the country. I look at the economy, the social and economics, the government, everything. And so with Poland, it was very interesting because they had been occupied by Russia for over 125 years prior to finally gaining their independence in 1918, right after the Great War, World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Poland finally got its independence after, over a century of fighting for that. And they had only just celebrated 20 years of independence when the Nazis came in. After the Nazis came the Soviet Union until 1990. So really, my character, Zofia, was born in this very small pocket of freedom, which, these children were raised in this really unusual situation, being told all of these centuries of people who had fought for freedom and how fierce and brave the Polish soldiers were. And so when I was thinking about creating Zofia's character, I thought, oh, I definitely need her to be rebellious and a little fiery. And of course, she's a book lover. And I thought, well, what would a fiery, rebellious book lover do when you have a tyrant knocking at your door as far as your country goes? And I thought, she would definitely want to read banned books. So I have her starting to read books that Hitler doesn't want to have in Germany. And there's no better way to enjoy books than with friends. So she actually has created sort of like a clandestine a clandestine book club for her and all of her friends to discuss these books. And so I was in the process of writing this story. I was like halfway done. I was initially going to have 2 POVs. And then I found these incredible journals, and this is really where you'll find out, I'll tell you all about it, but I found these incredible journals from actual public librarians in Warsaw. And they were detailing out all of the incredible things that they were doing, how they were sneaking books underneath Nazi noses so that they couldn't be looted, so they could save them from pulping. This amazing hidden warehouse where they were keeping all of them, how they were having these hidden warehouses and these hidden libraries. And even inside the ghetto, people were even taking their own personal libraries and putting them into suitcases and bringing them around to people who didn't have any books with them. And there was even Basha Temkin, who opened something called Centos, which was supposed to be an orphanage center, but really it was a secret library. And it had these little shelves that would flip around, and it would have a dollhouse on one side, and the other side would have a row of books that were in Yiddish and Polish. And so, fighting for having these books was really such an important part of the story that I knew I was trying to kind of take shape. So I was halfway done with my book. It was 2 POVs. I found this incredible information. And I realized I had to start completely over. So I threw the entire thing out. It totally broke my heart, but I knew that I really was on the right path with this. And I ended up asking for an extra month, which I know we're usually not supposed to do with our deadlines, but I told my publisher, it's going to be worth it, I promise. So I started over from square one with 1 POV, having it just be Zofia. And, you know, I put the whole entire book together, and it ended up working out very well. First of all, because it's like when you're shaping a book, sometimes it's almost like an artist that has like their you know, their clay, their lump of clay, and you know the shape, but you're just trying to find it. And I feel like that was sort of me with this initial story. And it worked out really well, because initially my release date was supposed to be the 4th of July. Well, now my release date was August 1st, which August was yesterday. August 1st was yesterday. It's still August. And so August 1st happens to be the date of the Warsaw Uprising, the anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. That's where 5 years of Nazi oppression is finally able to be fought back by the brave men and women of Warsaw. And it's such a huge deal that even in Warsaw today at 5 p.m. on August 1st, the entire city goes completely silent. And all of these alarms and sirens start to blare in honor of all of those incredibly brave men and women who fought to reclaim Warsaw. So, so I know we're kind of running out of time. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer those, but I wanted to keep it a little bit short and fast. Hopefully I did.
Thank you. I did have just one question. I wanted to hear more about the real life librarian you mentioned in the book. I'm afraid to pronounce her first name, but last name is Berman.
Yes, Basha Temkin Berman. Oops,
Okay.
I apologize. I'm on my laptop because I'm actually in a hotel and I couldn't figure out how to turn my do not disturb on. So Basha Berman Temkin, she was Jewish in Warsaw, and after the Treaty of Versailles was signed, there really should have been equality stated in the Treaty of Versailles. There should have been equality between Jewish people and Polish people. And unfortunately, as time went on, that was not the case. So the fact that she was Jewish and working in the Warsaw Public Library was honestly a very big deal. I mean, she was really an impressive woman. And so she first worked in the Warsaw Public Library, and then she ended up being fired when the Nazis came in, because they at one point fired all Jewish employees. And so when she ended up going into the ghetto, it was very important for her, for children especially, to be able to have access to books. And so when she would bring in these books, you know, a lot of Jewish children only spoke Polish because there were a lot of assimilated families. And she really wanted to make sure that children were also learning Yiddish. So when these children would check out books at Centos, she would make sure they got 2. One was in Polish and one was in Yiddish. And so they would end up taking those books, and she would even try to teach them all Yiddish and everything. And eventually, before the ghetto was completely liquidated, she and her husband managed to escape. Not only did they escape, but she also continued to help other people escape as well. I mean, she really was just such a true and incredible hero.
Thank you. She does sound amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you to all the other authors who joined us today. I really appreciate it. And I have a giant TBR now as well.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And such an amazing group of authors and wonderful books. You can purchase your books from Brodart. If you want to contact any of the authors, let me know, and I will send it to their publicists, and maybe they'll show up at one of your libraries. This was a wonderful event, and I thank everyone for participating. And I love your passion and the love that you have for what you do. So again, thank you very much. I'm going to end the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see. This has been recorded. Let me stop recording now.